Hello and bienvenue. I'm your host Anaïs, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Her Career, Her Coach, the podcast dedicated to empowering women to build a career they are truly passionate about. Today's guest is someone I met in the offline world who has kindly accepted my invitation to come in here and share her story. Her name is Lucy, and she has been my coach, mentor, and true inspiration to always go above and beyond each CrossFit class. Spoiler alert, this is where we met. Lucy is a true force of nature, whilst also being one of the kindest, supportive, and cheering people I've been lucky enough to cross paths with. So a massive thank you goes to you, and I can't wait to have this conversation. Lucy, welcome.
Oh, Anaïs, thank you so much. That's such a kind welcome.
It was the easiest introduction I've done for the podcast, I'm going to be honest. I'm so happy you're here.
When do we tell people that you bribed me to be here? Is that later?
Yeah, let's do it later. Let's do it at the end. So obviously, not anyone has been as lucky as me to get to know you. Would that be okay to share a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the work world, I work as an independent consultant. So I run my own business, working primarily with private sector companies of lots of different sizes, across lots of different industries as well, but mainly financial services. When people ask me what I do with those companies, then there's two different bits that I describe. I either help them as a company change or grow, so thinking about their strategy or business problems that they might have. But I'm also helping them with their people. So it might be coaching individuals, it could be helping them build their talent capability in their business. And I'm really loving both of those two areas. My background before consulting, which was 3 years now, was working for corporates. I worked for two companies. I joined Barclays as a graduate more than 20 years ago, worked for Barclays and Barclaycard, and then moved to a company called Hastings Direct and worked there for 7 or 8 years, lastly as their chief commercial and marketing officer and a member of their executive committee. And then, as you mentioned as well, I'm trying to create a bit of a second life as a qualified CrossFit level 1 coach as well in my spare time, if there is any.
I love that. Love that introduction of like the work world, work life, and a lot has happened that we need to unpack, but also what is happening additionally to this. Awesome. First question, I love asking this question. Can't wait to hear your answer. What is it that you love the most about how your life is set up? So the whole like both working world and also the coaching that you do. What is it that you love the most about this life?
I think it's twofold, and it's my kind of reason for being, for changing from corporate to being self-employed, and that's the variety and the flexibility. Variety because theoretically I get to choose the work that I do and the companies that I work with and the people that I work with. But probably more important, because most things are interesting, more important is that I get to do more than just one given day job for kind of 2 or 3 years at a time. And the flexibility is simple, really. The desire to do two things. One is to block out my calendar for every single school holiday. And I'm pretty successful at that, so that my little boy's 7, and whilst he still thinks mummy is cool enough, we get to hang out together. And then also so that I can spend more time in the gym.
Love that. So you've mentioned 3 actually key information here. The first one, like you said, when it comes to the work, you are in a position to choose the people that you work with, the team and the company that you support. That's one. The second part is obviously being available for school holidays to hang out with your kid. Love that. And also the third one, which is spending enough time at the gym. Do you feel like this is the balance of those 3 that work, or do you think there are also other components that you're also balancing altogether?
Well, probably should mention my husband and the rest of the family. So I think there's loads of different components of balance. I think I talk about my health and my fitness and my son because maybe typically they're the things that, you know, people talk about, whether it's mum guilt or otherwise, about not having enough time to spend with your family or your kids. Then also I don't have enough time to be fit or to exercise. And so I guess they're the obvious things to say that I'm really, really working hard to balance. Hey, look, we'll probably come on to this later. I would say that balance is one of the biggest challenges that I've had throughout my career. And so I'm kind of working in a particular way to give me balance, but I'm still a kind of all-in person, and that will always create its own challenges.
Yeah, completely understood. And I think you've mentioned you've been an independent consultant for 3 years. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, just almost my 3rd year anniversary now.
Ooh, happy anniversary in advance. I can bribe you again for celebrating this one. And I guess through that, you obviously navigated, is it COVID? Is that fair to say? I think that happened over the past 3 years. I'm confused with time now, but I'm assuming, like you were talking about balance, you probably started a certain way and then had to evolve along the way. Now that obviously we are in a different ways of working than we were a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the real story about COVID for me was, as a family, we had packed up our lives and our jobs to go traveling at the end of 2019. And we were planning to travel for 6 months before James started school. And obviously those dates clashed with COVID. And so we managed 10 weeks and we had the best adventure. But actually we arrived back in the UK on the 18th of March, no car, no laptops, because we've been so organized in packing up our life.
I didn't expect.
Where to go. But, you know, in the grand scheme of COVID, it was very much a first world problem. To your question about kind of different working environments, my first gig as a consultant was 12 months in an organization. And during those 12 months, I led a team of around 250 people.
Wow.
Through a full reorganizational transformation. And I met everybody in the office, the leadership team only, sorry, 2 days during those whole 12 months. So everything was done virtually. It was extraordinary. Brand new company, brand new team, people that I didn't know, full reorganization, completely on Teams.
Wow. How was it? How did you navigate that?
Well, firstly, I remember feeling useless. So I started going back to work on like the 1st of July, technologically useless. And everyone had been working online since March. And I couldn't figure out how Teams and Zoom work. So problem number one was not being an idiot. Everyone had got used to it and I was getting used to this world. The real upside, though, honestly, the genuine upside was that everybody I spoke to, their name was in the bottom left corner of the screen.
Yeah, that's helpful.
And that is golden if you're in a company where you don't know people. So, you know, look, flippancy. So getting myself just technically oriented was one challenge. There is an upside, which is that people's names are on the screens. I suppose it was cool because it was a challenge to put everything I've been learning for the last 20 years around how to lead into real practice. Because, of course, I was still leading, but I was leading in the most unusual circumstances for me.
True.
So I guess I was just going as deep into that toolkit of capability as I could. And I was, you know, learning what was working as I went and adjusting on the fly and getting new skills about how do you engage 200 people on a team session when they're going through a huge amount of change, when you've never met people and they don't know who you are. You know, those things are good old challenges, really.
Yeah. And I mean, the word that comes to mind is like complete uncharted waters. I love this expression. I mean, for you, because of the transition that you've made, but also for this team, for the world that we were in back then, like it looked completely new to everybody. And I think that actually made me want to ask you, what made you want to make the transition to become an independent consultant?
It's the thing that I talked about before. I really wanted flexibility and I wanted variety. But the other part of that is, as I went through my career, I just wasn't sure that the next job or the next opportunity on the career ladder was going to be as fulfilling. I had the best time in corporate life, and in particular Hastings Direct is one of the highlights. I love the company, I love the people, I still do. Some of the people there are, you know, remain some of my best friends, and I'm so proud of what the company has and continues to achieve, and, you know, my small part in it. But without being morbid, I didn't know that on my deathbed another job would make me feel like I did more. Maybe I just knew that I'd gone as far as I could, should, wanted to in that organization. And I'd had this kind of, I wonder if for so long, probably 5 years, I'd been sort of secretly thinking about, is there a different way? And so that, you know, it was the culmination of it. It gave me some things that I didn't think I could get in corporate life. It was just time, I think.
Exciting. Talking about time, I feel like it's definitely the time to unpack what have been your top 3 career achievements.
Yeah, the first one I wanted to share was, you know, if anybody is listening to this conversation and you look at my achievements, I sometimes think you can look at an individual and think that, I don't know, they can feel extraordinary or out of the reach. And that's, by the way, not me saying that I am. The achievement that I want to talk about is the fact that I got to where I did. Because there's nothing spectacular about me or my family or my upbringing. I mean, I have a supportive family. and that's my mum, my dad, and now my husband. But I was the first and only person in my wider family to ever go to university.
Wow.
And I made my way to Warwick University, and then somehow Barclays Bank saw something in me. And I remember being completely shocked when they offered me a job.
Mm.
And I think if I try and pinpoint why, so I had a stepmom, and she spent 3 years telling me that finding a job would be really hard. And I think I got to the point where I assumed it would never happen. And then I had a boyfriend, an ex-boyfriend, who in retrospect was not so lovely. And he told me, I remember him telling me that I would never hold down a full-time job, which is a really
Wow.
ludicrous thing to say. And I think there's a name for those kind of guys these days.
Yeah, there is.
But anyway, the highlight is that I am where I am, not, and I guess to give heart to people, that I don't think you have to have come from a particular place or to have done particular things in order to achieve whatever your version of success is.
Oh, I love that. I mean, this goes in the quote that I'll be sharing with this episode, because you just shared a very nice reminder that essentially where you're coming from doesn't have to define where you're going next.
No, but I also, let's be clear, I had a perfectly nice and normal upbringing. There are people who have really tough times as well. So that's not to be underplayed either, but I want people to feel like anything is possible.
Yeah, I love that. Very, very helpful message to put out there. Thank you.
Can I talk about Hastings Direct a little more?
You do whatever you want to do. This is a conversation between you and I. Everyone knows I've bribed you already to come here, so by all means, let's do what you want to talk about.
Well, this is like the total job highlight. So effectively, I was with Hastings Direct for 7 or 8 years, and I was part of the leadership team that took the company from private ownership into private equity investment, and then subsequently listed on the FTSE 250. And you know what? I had a break halfway through for my maternity leave. And to the credit of the then CEO, Gary Hoffman, I was promoted whilst I was away into an executive committee position. He literally rang me when James was 6 weeks old. We talked a bit about my career before I went on maternity leave. And he rang me and said, there's an opportunity. Do you want it? And he had to wait patiently for quite a few more months until I was ready to come back. And I think if I were to be flippant, I would say there would be women out there who have gone on maternity leave and they have come back and there's a bloke in their desk doing their job and everyone's pretending it hasn't happened. And this is just the opposite of that. And that's just one small example of why, Hastings is a brilliant company. So brilliant for an individual. But I would also say that the business performance we generated to make the transition into FTSE 250 happen was brilliant. But more than that, way more than that, I had the privilege to work with the best group of people. And probably key to it being a highlight was that I felt that during my time there, it was the time when I really learned who I was as a leader.
I love it.
Kind of the superpowers that I had, and equally kind of the overplayed strengths, the things that weren't brilliant as well. But I kind of finally made peace with myself as a leader and felt that I knew what I offered to an organization.
That is fantastic. I mean, a couple of things that definitely we need to talk a little bit more from what you said. The first one is that I do have almost on a weekly basis conversations such as, I was on mat leave, I'm coming back, and I wasn't considered for the round of promotion, even though I did all of the hard work last year. Or like you said, there is someone doing my job, I just can't find my feet anymore. So I'm glad that you've just shared your story, which did involve you being reached out to whilst on mat leave to get offered a position. I think this is fantastic because it means there are companies out there who do exist. We just need more of them and more fantastic people like your former manager. The second thing that you also mentioned, which I think I'd love to know more about, what happened there, what you said about finding yourself, like you said, finding who you were as a leader and what were your strengths. How do you think that happened? Do you think this is because of the people that you were with? Is it because of the change of scope? Like, how do you think this whole piece got entangled? That might say.
That's a good point. Let me not forget that second one. Let me just cover off the point about maternity leave. If you remember when I described it, I went into the CEO and I told him when I was really heavily pregnant, a bit like a bowling ball. I sat with my fingers behind my back. I crossed my fingers and I told him I thought the next job for me was an executive committee role. I didn't know for certain. I felt deeply nervous about making a statement like that, but I knew it was the thing that I should say to make my intent clear to him. And I say all of that because kind of whatever job you're in as an individual, there's definitely an obligation on the company to do right by you, but you also need to make your intentions clear. And so making sure you are thinking about what's your message to your employer before you go off on maternity leave, making sure you also think about how you stay in touch with the company and show that you are interested. Those things will matter. Now, look, having a baby is super hard. And I think sometimes getting out of bed, putting the clothes on, feeding the baby and keeping yourself sane is more than enough. But I think where you do have space and you are able to lean in a little bit to the company and remind them that you are there, you should do those things as well. And then I do think the obligation is on the organisation to do the right thing as well. And then your other question, sorry, just remind me.
Well, yes, we were talking about you finding your feet as a leader, really truly thriving to your true strength and capabilities. I was just curious to know, how do you think that happened? Was it because of the team that you were with? Was it because you came back to another type of role? You had more challenges? How do you think that happened?
Yeah, so I think a few things happened. One is the job before I left Hastings Direct was Barclaycard, and it was in some ways like a really huge career achievement. I was made managing director by the time I was 30. And the business performance of that business was great, but I kind of flunked on the politics. And we can talk about that later. But I guess one of the reasons why I know Hastings went so well, and one of the reasons why, is because they were willing and able and happy to let me be me. I fitted in. It culturally worked for me. You've posted recently, I think a week or two ago, maybe even just a few days ago, about if you feel like you don't fit in or you feel out of place, it can be because there's a misalignment between what you need and what the company needs.
True.
And that was happening in Barclaycard. And then when that didn't happen in Hastings, it left me feeling free. And then a couple of other things happened. One is the passing of time, and you just learn what you're good at, and that helps. And the second thing is that I remember the moment we did this, like, you know, some kind of personality profile. I think it was Insights as a leadership team. And historically, whenever I've received feedback about areas of development, I've been really hard on myself. Like, I remember in the early days being in tears about stuff that I hadn't done very well. And something happened a few years into Hastings when we went through this profile. I don't quite remember how or why, but it occurred to me, and it had never occurred to me before, that the areas of strength that I had were the opposites to the, you know, the kind of at-risk areas, the derailers, the development areas. So, for example, I know that I am capable of helping teams feel like we can go and do extraordinary things. I love being bold and audacious and pushing us and going for great stuff. Now, you don't get like that. You don't have that as a kind of, as a strength, if at the same time you're also sometimes probably a bit capable of kind of not hearing or listening hard enough, or maybe not always considering consequences, because the two things don't go together, right? There are strengths that create weaknesses. And I suppose at some point in Hastings, I recognized that. And it's not to say that I stopped working on those weaknesses, but I understood them in the context of who I was. And that was just really freeing for me.
Love that. Anyone listening to this, I think, again, this is just a nice reminder to give yourself time to figure things out. But at the same time, I mean, it's just a thin balance between making sure that you allow yourself enough time to, you know, get to know yourself, settling in with the team that you are in, and also understand, you know, what is it that you can capitalize on in terms of strength, but also, like you were saying, in terms of some of the things that you might not be as good at, you know, how does that go into your list in terms of, are there some areas that you actively want to work on, or are there some that is okay to let go as well? Because this is fine. Like, you can't be on every front all the time. But the one thing that I'm taking away from what you shared also is that basically you have allowed yourself to figure that, for example, Barclays at some point was not necessarily for you anymore. So I love the point that you've made when it comes to reminding yourself that sometimes you're just not in the right environment, and that's actually okay, because when you are in the right one, you will also know it. So any recommendations for anyone listening in who potentially feels like that might not be the right environment for them, but they're just not sure yet what decision to make to help them move forward?
Yeah, it's a good one, isn't it? I think if you've been there for a period of time, you know, like more than 6 months, and you're feeling, I don't know, like you don't fit in, I guess is the best descriptor for various different reasons. And it could be all sorts, right? It can be, I don't know, like the demographics of people. It can be ways of working, it can be the culture of the company, it can be the behaviors. One example I give is that some places really like kind of bold and aggression and talkative, chatty, pushy people. And some people are real natural collaborators, bring people together, and that might not be valued in a company. They're brilliant people, but in a job, in a company, it might not be as appreciated. So I think if you can identify it, then the other thing I talk to people about when coaching is then, what to do about it. Do you know location, 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 or is it too much of a British TV show?
No, I think someone mentioned it to me.
Okay, well, basically, the woman presenter in that, she talks about there needs to be a push and a pull. So if you're looking to buy a new house, you need to have a good reason to not want to live where you are. But when you find a new house, you have to have a pull towards that house. I always think job hunting is the same thing. So I think it's one thing sitting there and saying, well, I've now got my push. But then I hear lots from people, but how will I know if it's the right job, and how am I going to make a choice, and what happens if I get it wrong again? And all the question marks about making a decision, but they haven't found anything. They haven't even spoken to anybody. And I think sometimes you have to take a few steps forward to identify what the options are specifically, to then see if that push-pull is there.
Yeah. I think this is really interesting what you're mentioning, because a lot of people are usually follow their push intuition, as in I have to get away, when they're making that decision. But like you said, they're very much confused as to how do I know it's the right. So I think that they're not necessarily in tune as much with the pull side of things. So anybody listening in, remember there is a balance between the push and the pull. You need to be comfortable in both sides. Love that.
Perfect.
Shall we have a look at it on the other side? Career challenges.
Yeah, definitely. I would say my career's been littered with highs and lows. One of my first lows was in my early 20s at some point. I went in Barclays and I did a small regional leadership role of 7 Barclays branches. So I was leading like 120 people.
Wow.
I was 23 or 24.
Wow.
And honestly, it didn't go very well. It was a failing area with an unclear remit, with a person who was not ready for the job and a boss who was interesting. And honestly, I didn't really understand. I look back now. I didn't really understand what was needed of me. And I certainly was not a great leader. Performance wasn't great when I arrived. It certainly wasn't really changed by the time I left. And if in the end, actually, structural change saved me. So they removed my role from the organization, not just me, but every retail leader, it was called at that point. And I went back to head office. To put it positively, I guess I reflected heavily. What I did do was I studied a certificate in leadership at Nottingham Trent University, I think it was, almost immediately afterwards. And I didn't realize this would happen, but I used that experience as a real life case study of kind of how I had led. And then I learned lots of, I guess, academic stuff about leadership that I didn't know before. And that really helped me face into some of the stuff that I didn't do so well. And it probably helped me in a kind of, cathartic way as well, kind of come to terms with the fact that I hadn't been brilliant at it. Because if I'm honest, I would have said at the beginning, I want to be a leader. And so facing into the fact that my first scale leadership role I'd done pretty badly was a sort of bitter pill to swallow. And it made me very determined. But for sure, that was anything but a highlight.
That's really interesting. If I may ask, because like you said, they could have been, sometimes I just get my brain, okay, let me know if I'm going too far. But sometimes my brain goes into like, what would happen in that parallel dimension if I would have made X, Y, and Z decision? And so I feel like in your case, from what you said, following that experience, potentially a parallel life for you would have, I just don't want to do any leadership role again, right? So what made you decide, actually, I need to do it again?
Yeah, I don't know. Because I felt like I should be good at it. And I really wanted to be good at it. I really wanted to be good. When I was in my first or second job, my boss at the time, he would never remember this. He said to me, and so I'm on the graduate scheme. He said, people follow you, Lucy. And it struck me. And that was before this drama, right? So I guess in my head, I'm like, I could be a leader. And then I'm like, oh God, I am not a leader.
And then, maybe I can be again.
Yeah, then I went away to find out what's the theory behind this? What did I not do? And therefore, how do I make sure I do it properly next time?
Awesome. Any other challenges that you want to share?
I mean, look, we talked about my Barclaycard one,
We did.
the MD role. Yeah, fundamentally, that was how funny that I could have overdialed so hard on making a business perform well, but not spot what it to be successful as a senior leader in a complex matrix organization. I just missed it entirely. But the other one I really wanted to talk about, we spoke, or I nudged on it earlier, is about balance.
Yeah.
I'm all in. And I can point to a few times, maybe more than a few times through my career when my balance was off. It was off when I did that retail leader role, by the way. It was too far away. I was traveling too far. I had not doing it right. But I think my last couple of years in company life are a great example as well. I think I knew, it was coming to a corporate end for me, and it was post-baby. I wanted to be the mum that I wanted to be. I had a big job. I had other family responsibilities. And I was trying to get back into CrossFit, unsurprisingly. And by the time I left, I was absolutely exhausted. On my leaving dinner, I couldn't even speak. I'd lost my voice. I was,
wow.
terribly, terribly exhausted. I mean, I'm sure people noticed around the table that I couldn't speak at my leaving do, but I'm not sure others would spot this in me. But I know that my family have spotted it. My husband, John, he tries to remind me, my mum, and definitely my dad. And like I said to you, right now, I manage it better because I work less. But I think you also know that what I've basically done is I've taken my corporate push and I've put it all into seeing how hard I can push myself at CrossFit. So it will be an unsolved question for me, I suspect, forever. Watch out. It, is how I keep the right balance in my life when I want to push so hard in, various different ways.
I feel like we need to talk a little bit more about this one. I mean, I'm glad that you're bringing this one up because it's something I'm having fantastic conversations, and every time this word comes up, balance, right? And I don't think there is one single solution that works because every woman is different, especially in the context of, having a family too. Every family is different, and there are so many variables that I don't think there is one model fits all. However, I do feel like there is a philosophy around it that sometimes works better. And exactly like you said, the whole less is more sometimes could actually be counterintuitive at first, but could actually be the one thing that sometimes you need, right? And I'd love to know more about how was it for you to actually apply that, especially in the working side of things, to then allow yourself more time for CrossFit.
Yeah, good point. I mean, probably the good example is the last 2 years of corporate life. So after going back, it was probably 3 years after having James, I was back at work and I had red lines. At first, there were red lines about, well, I was still nursing James, and so I had to be home. But as nursing stopped, my red lines were about, I would leave the office early, on the dot. I would cycle home with my husband because he worked in the same office to get home for the nanny. And then I would hang with James until bedtime. And then I would do CrossFit after that, or I would work after that. So, let's be honest, that's still too much going on in your life. And my husband and I would do morning shifts early, and one would look after James until the nanny came. It's still too much. But I guess the point is that I would advocate for red lines. Now, I think red lines are, you need to be careful. I don't think you can run into the office and say, I've got 5 red lines, boss, that I need to tell you about. Let me tell you what I'm willing to do and not do.
Yeah.
Of course, that doesn't work. I think you need to consider the needs of the business and your needs. And I think you need to find places in which, both can be okay. And for me, it was that leaving early. And for sure, there were very occasional times when things were happening in the office, or if I was traveling, that I had to be there or I needed to be on the phone. But there were also times when my boss forgot and he rang me, and he would hear James and he'd be like, oh, it's okay. You can ring me later, because we were kind of understood the balance I was trying to create. So I think first and foremost, be great at your job, put your best foot forward, do a good job, and then you will have the liberty to set some boundaries and, be clear and consistent and appropriate with those, particularly in the way in which you communicate them. And I don't care whether you're male, female, whether you've got kids or not got kids. I think we all should be having boundaries in our life that are important to us.
Yeah. And I feel like this one is actually an interesting one. It's something you've mentioned earlier in this conversation that I'd like to emphasize again for anyone listening in, is that not only you need to be clear about what those boundaries are, but like you said, you really have to communicate about it. Because I feel like sometimes we know what we want, but there is, for some reason, a gap between verbalizing this out and let the people around us know about that. And I feel like this is where the magic happens. When you're consistent, clear, and communicating about those boundaries, pretty much, everything can roll out the way it's supposed to, because, you're protecting yourself and you're doing the things that matter to you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And hey, what you don't want to be doing is communicating when you're annoyed. look, I just have to go home. That's like the worst scenario. Ahead of time, it's about, hey, look, this is something that's really important to me. What I can do is I can make sure that afterwards I can pick up any voicemails. And of course, that if something emergency was happening, I would be there. But we both know that that's very unlikely to happen that often. But if you need me, I will be there. I just need a bit of notice. It's that kind of conversation that says, look, I do care about what the company needs here, but I'm just trying to find a way to make it work for both of us.
I love that. And do you have those, I'm assuming they're probably different, but running your own business, how does that work with red lines and boundaries?
Yeah, so I have wonderful EA, Francesca, and we have red lines all over the diary. So the diary has blocked out holidays, mornings, school pickups, Fridays. If I'm not working full on, we try and keep Fridays clear as well. So Francesca is the protector of the boundaries, and she's wonderful.
Love it. Love it. I know we're having this conversation on a special day that I know you are available for it. So I know a little bit about that. It's working. It's absolutely working. I feel like we've moved on to another part of the podcast that I definitely wanted to hear your views on, which is all about any recommendations that you'd like to share. And just so you know, from what we discussed so far, I do have, especially from your background, what you've shared, that pretty much everything is possible. This is a very important reminder for anyone to keep in mind. We've just talked about boundaries and the red lines. I feel like this is super key as well. Any other recommendations that you'd like to share with us?
Yes. Definitely.
Okay, everybody grab your pen and paper. This is coming.
I really want to remind people to find what matters to them and invest in it. Because I think that organizations and bosses are very good at thinking that, I don't know, more money, big job title, greasy career ladder, all of these things are the things that are supposed to excite us. And I think it's really naive. And I think you maybe need to ignore those people in the office and just reflect a little bit more about what is it that matters to you? Work, home, love, children, animals, fitness, whatever it is, it's unique to you. And your peace will only come when you understand it and you choose to walk your own path. I think that's critical.
Yeah.
And I find that really hard because I don't feel like I fit into that corporate narrative of what you're supposed to do with your career. People think you're bonkers for stepping away from a huge, successful, happy corporate career just because it doesn't quite feel right. But I think too often we're controlled by what other people think we should do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, other people expectations or whatever that is, society or the way we were, born and raised, whatever. There are so many variables, but I feel like you said, essentially, you just have to stop for a second, just ignore the outside noises and voices and think what matters to you, like you were saying. Because, for example, for me, this voice inside me was getting louder and louder when I was thinking, I love the people relationship. I love the internationality of the work I'm doing. I don't like the Excel spreadsheets and the cost saving bottom line that is expected in procurement. And I've made a move that everybody around me was super scared shitless, excuse my French. And they just projected their own fears and they're like, but you're too young to do this, because this was just their own fears. And I feel like just hearing your story, Lucy, and this is why I'm sharing a little bit of mine too. Anyone listening in, remember that essentially this is your life. You get to make the decisions. And if there is something that just doesn't feel just aligned yet, there might be some other variables that can exist. Like you, for example, you are absolutely capitalizing all your strength, your skills, your expertise that you've acquired those past 20 years. But in a way that works for you to be here as well for your family and do your fitness and smash CrossFit and remember to kick my butt when I'm seeing you in classes. So, anybody can find their own way. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Can I do 1.5 other ones?
You do how many as you want. Absolutely.
I really want to talk about your cheer squad. And, I put you in there as well. And yes. Look, these are people, your cheer squad are people that they encourage you to go for bold things. And they remind you that you can do it. They also hold you to account, and then they pick you up when things are not perfect.
Yep.
I would describe the girl gang in our CrossFit box as being the perfect cheer squad. And in particular for me, Helen and Hannah are people that I would turn to, and they bloody care, but they bloody care not in a wrap you up in cotton wool. They will hold me to account. They will say, you do something differently, and can you think about it differently? And I think I got into female cheer squads a little late in the day, and they don't have to be female, but I think there's something pretty damn cool about it. So I think recognize it for what it is, a bunch of people who are stood right behind you, desperate for you to succeed and to help you do it. And that's pretty cool. I love it.
Yeah, I love that. I usually talk about support system, but I love the cheer squad. So I'll steal it away from you in the sense that I'll put that along with the podcast because that's a very, very important point.
Thank you. And the final one is, I just want to say, and that's, you know, part of the reason for being online with you today is to be generous and to pay it forward.
Oh.
As soon as you can be generous to others, to make introductions, to talk somebody up, to tell someone they made a brilliant point, to give a reference or to provide advice. God, it feels good. And we've each got a job to do to open doors for each other. And I don't mean just women, I mean just generally.
Mm-hmm.
I try and do as much of this as I possibly can, because there have been some people along the way that have sponsored me and enabled me to do what I wanted to do. And so therefore I want to help others as well. So it's just a good reminder that sometimes earlier than you realize in your career, you can pay it forward. You can start to open doors for other people. And that's a wonderful feeling.
I love it. So thank you for paying it forward. Absolutely.
You're welcome.
Final word that I'd love to hear from you, that would you say is summarizing the conversation we just had together?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask me this.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of a maths girl, not really a words girl. So I thought about it and I did some kind of like thesaurus. so I came up with adventurous.
Oh, yes. I love that.
Do you reckon that's okay?
I mean, whatever you would have said would have been okay, but just coming from you, I just love it even more. Just watching you, doing the CrossFit classes and just being adventurous with this, and even being adventurous with your own career and, finding your own path, holding your red lines, whatever that is. I love it.
Yeah, have an adventurous career, have an adventurous life. That feels right.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Lucy. I've had a blast. Time flew by. I loved it.
Oh, thank you so much, Naya. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for having me.
If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with anyone you believe would benefit from hearing it. Because as you know, life is too short to feel unfulfilled at work.